Dust rose high on the wagon trail that cut through the dry fields outside the little village, clinging to the late summer air like smoke. The town itself was not much more than a handful of buildings stretched along a single dirt road, wooden storefronts with sagging porches, a church whose bell tolled sharp against the silence, and the constant creak of the windmill that never seemed to rest. Folks here were used to the quiet rhythm of hard work, sunup to sundown, broken only by the rattle of a passing wagon or the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It was the kind of place where news traveled slower than the river thaw, but once it did, everyone carried it like gospel. That week, the talk was of the rancher. He had sent word down the line months earlier that he'd placed an order with a matchmaker, the sort of arrangement men out here leaned on when the fields stretched too wide and the nights too long. It wasn't uncommon in those days. Letters traded back and forth, promises written in careful ink, hope tucked into the seams of an envelope. A bride would arrive on a stagecoach or wagon, and by week's end, a wedding would be had. The town was curious, more curious than usual, because the rancher was not a man given to surprises. His cattle covered the hills like smoke, his fences ran straighter than most, and his word was said to be iron. If he had ordered a bride, folks trusted she'd come. The sun hung heavy the afternoon the wagon finally rolled in. Wheels groaned. Horses flicked their tails, and heads turned all along the street. The driver hopped down first, dusting off his coat and shouting for help with the trunks. Then a slim figure stepped out, clutching the side rail as if steadying herself against the eyes that fixed on her. She was younger than some expected, with a bonnet tugged low and gloves that had seen miles of road. Murmurs slipped through the bin, gathered crowd like wind through dree grass. Some smiled, others whispered, and a few exchanged knowing looks. This must be the bride. But another figure moved behind her. The second woman lifted her skirts free of the step and touched ground, with a quiet confidence that startled more than one bystander. She was not dressed as plain as her companion, nor as timid. Her gaze swept the road, the storefronts, the stairs, and she held herself as though she had chosen this place rather than been carried to it. Her presence made the first seem almost fragile by comparison. A hush settled, and the people watched, uncertain which one belonged to the rancher. What no one said aloud, though many thought it, was this: the wrong sister had stepped off the wagon. The younger woman, the one who had been promised, remained close to the driver, her eyes downcast, her breath short. She looked like a girl who had left home too soon, letters written by another hand on her behalf. But the elder sister, the one who stood straighter than most men in town, was the one who met the curious gazes without blinking. She carried something unreadable in her eyes, as if she were already measuring the land, the people, the weight of the choice she had just made. The rancher arrived late, dust streaking his boots from a morning spent driving cattle. He dismounted with the quiet grace of a man accustomed to command, though those who knew him well said he spoke more to horses than to neighbors. He tipped his hat, walked the short distance to the wagon, and for the briefest of moments, his stride faltered. He had expected one woman, and here stood two. No one breathed as the moment stretched. Children pressed forward, women gripped each other's sleeves, and men shifted their weight in the dust. The rancher's gaze lingered, trying to read the truth of the matter. Which one had answered his call? Which one had carried the letters meant for him? The sisters stood side by side, their likeness unmistakable, yet their differences sharper still. The driver cleared his throat, fumbling with the trunk, muttering something about changes on the trail, but his words fell thin against the charged silence. All eyes were on the sisters and the rancher. The younger's lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. The elder stepped forward instead, meeting the rancher's eyes, her chin raised just enough to declare something unspoken. She was not the bride he had ordered, but she was the one standing before him, And in that heartbeat of recognition, before anyone could break the silence, the whole town understood that the rancher's careful plans had been altered on the very road into town. What would come of it, whether scandal, heartbreak, or something stranger, still hung heavy in the late summer air, waiting for the next word to be spoken. The rancher's hand flexed at his side, the crowd leaned closer, and the sisters stood. In the dust of the wagon rode one trembling, one unyielding as the story truly began. Would you like me to continue writing this story beyond the 1,200-word introduction and carry it into the first few unfolding scenes, or keep the suspense hanging right here? The silence between the sisters and the rancher seemed to stretch longer than it should have. The crowd stood frozen, waiting for some sign that would explain the mistake, but none came. The elder sister's gaze remained steady, her eyes never leaving the rancher's face. The younger shifted behind her, half hidden now, as though she wished she could vanish back into the wagon and be carried away. At last, the rancher broke the stillness with a quiet clearing of his throat. "Which one of you is supposed to be here?" His voice was low, calm, but beneath it ran a sharp current of unease. He had asked for certainty, not riddles. The elder sister answered first. "We both are." Her tone carried no hesitation, though her words only thickened the confusion. She did not explain herself further, and perhaps she didn't intend to. The younger looked up suddenly, her face pale in the dust and sun. "It was me," she whispered, though the words seemed to falter. "I was the one expected." The driver shifted nervously, pulling at his hat. "Letters came, sure enough," he muttered, "but there was trouble back home. The families thought best to send them together." He left it at that, but his uneasy glance toward the elder sister said more than his words. The rancher studied them both, silent. He was a man used to weighing cattle, land, storms, measuring what could be endured and what would break a man. Yet in this moment, nothing felt as simple as fence lines or herd counts. Two sisters stood before him, one promised by letters, the other stepping into a place she had no claim to. The townsfolk began to murmur again. Some whispered that it was a blessing to women when only one had been asked for. Others said it was a curse, a sign of trouble that would seep into the rancher's well-kept life. And a few watched with eyes sharp enough to see that this was not simply a mistake of travel or chance. Something deeper lay beneath. The rancher gave no answer, only tipped his hat slightly and said, "We'll talk at the ranch." He lifted the trunk with ease and set it into his wagon, then offered no hand to either sister, leaving them to climb up as they would. The elder helped the younger settle on the bench, then took the place beside her, shoulders squared. The wagon rolled out of town, leaving the crowd unsettled, left with only dust and questions. The ranch stretched wide across the valley, its pastures rolling out toward the horizon where the mountains rose like old guardians. Fences ran straight and long, a testament to the rancher's discipline, and the cattle grazed thick across the land. The house stood solid, 2 stories of plain wood with a porch deep enough for shade. It was not fancy, but it had the air of permanence, a place built to last. As the wagon rattled into the yard, ranch hands paused from their work, lifting their hats in quiet greeting. They eyed the sisters with curiosity, but none dared ask aloud what every man was thinking. The rancher kept his silence, carrying trunks inside, setting them down without a word. The elder sister walked the house slowly, her hand brushing the banister, her gaze fixed on the neat order of the place. The younger lingered near the door, still uncertain, her eyes darting toward her sister as though seeking permission for every step. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, the rancher finally spoke. He sat at the table, his hands clasped before him, and studied them across the lamplight. "I was promised a bride," he said, plain and without ornament. "I was told her name. Now I see 2. You'll need to tell me which one of you intends to keep that promise." The younger's lips trembled, and she looked again to her sister. But it was the elder who spoke, calm as ever. Circumstances changed. What was written may not matter anymore. The rancher's eyes narrowed. It matters plenty. Out here, a man doesn't make agreements lightly. Nor does a woman, the elder replied, her voice steady. The words hung heavy, like storm clouds building over dry land. The younger's hands twisted in her lap, her breath shallow. At last she whispered, I never wanted this. I was told it was for the best, but I don't." Her voice broke, and she stopped, ashamed of the confession. The rancher turned his gaze to the elder. "Then why are you here?" The elder met his eyes. "To see that she's safe." "To see that what?" "She cannot bear, I can." It was not the answer he expected. He leaned back in his chair, silent, trying to gauge the meaning beneath her words. She had not claimed the title of bride, nor denied it. She had only placed herself in the space between what was promised and what was possible. Outside, the night air was sharp with the sound of crickets. The cattle lowed in the distance, restless under the rising moon. Inside, 3 lives sat in a circle of lamplight, each carrying truths that could not yet be spoken. The days that followed brought little clarity. The younger kept to the house, timid and uncertain, learning the shape of the rooms but not the rhythm of the ranch. She walked the porch sometimes, her eyes always on the road, as if she still hoped another wagon might come and carry her away. The elder, by contrast, moved as though she belonged. She rose early, watched the men drive the cattle, studied the land as if memorizing its lines. She asked questions, not idle ones, but sharp, practical ones that made the rancher pause. How many head could the pastures truly hold through winter? How often did the river flood its banks? What tools were mended and what needed replacing? These were not the words of a guest, nor of a woman passing through. The rancher noticed. He noticed, too, that she carried herself with the weight of someone who had chosen her path, even if that path was not meant to be hers. Yet still, the truth hung unspoken. He had ordered a bride, and the younger had been sent. But it was the elder who seemed to stand beside him, even without the words of promise. The town did not forget either. When he rode in for supplies, the questions followed him like shadows. Which one is it? Have you chosen? What does the preacher say? He answered none of them, only tipped his hat and carried on. But gossip has its own legs, and soon every porch and parlor buzzed with talk of the sisters. Some said the younger was too weak, others that the elder was too bold. Some whispered that it would end in scandal, that the rancher's name would be tarnished, no matter his choice. Back at the ranch, the tension deepened. The younger grew more withdrawn, her voice seldom rising above a whisper. The elder grew more certain, though never boastful, and her quiet strength filled the spaces her sister left empty. The rancher found himself caught between the promise of letters and the truth of presence, between what had been arranged and what was unfolding before him. One night, as a storm rolled across the valley, lightning flashing white against the black hills, the younger came to his door, trembling. "She means to stay," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "And I can't do what was asked." The rancher stood silent, the storm's thunder shaking the window panes. The younger's confession was no surprise, yet it left the choice no less heavy dot behind her. In the flicker of the storm's light, the elder appeared. She did not speak, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was not there by mistake. She had stepped off the wagon not by accident, but by design. The storm raged outside, wind howling across the valley, rain slashing against the earth. Inside, 3 lives stood at a crossroads, the promise of a union dangling by a thread, and the truth of their hearts locked in silence. And in that silence, The rancher understood that nothing in his life would remain as it was before the wagon came. The storm passed, but it left its mark on the land. The valley smelled of wet earth, the creek swelled with rushing water, and the air carried the chill of autumn close behind. At the ranch, the storm had also left something unsettled inside. The walls of the house. The younger sister stayed quiet, moving as lightly as a shadow, while the elder carried herself as though the storm had washed away whatever hesitation she might have once felt. The rancher sensed the shift but could not name it. Every morning, the rancher rode out to check the fences and the cattle, and each time he returned, he found the elder sister watching from the porch. At first it seemed casual, but soon he realized it was more than idle interest. She was studying, learning, as if preparing herself for something larger than she would admit. He never asked why. Instead, he found himself listening to her questions about the land, her sharp eye noticing what others overlooked. The younger, meanwhile, grew more fragile, retreating deeper into herself. She stitched quietly by the fire or lingered in her room, her voice barely present at the table. The hands on the ranch noticed the change as well. They spoke of it in the bunkhouse, in low voices over their meals. They respected the elder sister's steadiness, but they also whispered that it was not right. A promise had been made, and promises in these parts were worth more than silver. Yet it was clear to them who carried herself like a rancher's wife, and who did not. When the rancher went into town for supplies, the questions grew sharper. The storekeeper's wife asked openly which sister he meant to take to the preacher. The blacksmith smirked, saying he couldn't recall such a mix-up in all his years. Children whispered in the street, running ahead to point and laugh before being hushed by their mothers. The preacher himself sought the rancher out, reminding him that a union without clarity would bring confusion to the whole community. Rancher said little, but each question dug into him like a thorn. One evening, the elder sister walked the length of the property with him, her steps matching his stride as though she had done it all her life. "They won't let this rest," he said quietly, watching the cattle graze in the fading light. "They don't need to," she replied. "It doesn't matter what they say. It matters what we choose." The rancher turned to look at her. "We? You speak as though you were the one promised." Her gaze did not waver. She was promised, but she doesn't want it. I won't see her forced into something she fears. If a choice must be made, I'll stand in her place. It was the first time she had said it so plainly, and the weight of her words struck him harder than he expected. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked on, the silence between them carrying more than words could hold. The younger sister overheard enough of these exchanges to feel her place shrinking day by day. At night, she lay awake, listening to the creak of the floorboards as her sister moved through the house, confident and sure. She wondered if she had been brought west only to be erased. She wrote letters by candlelight, though she had no one to send them to, and tucked them away in her trunk. In her heart, she feared she had been forgotten even before she arrived. Tension grew not only in the house but in town as well. A merchant who had once courted the younger sister back east sent word through a traveler that he had expected her return, not her departure. Rumors twisted this into talk that the rancher had stolen another man's bride. The truth was less dramatic, but the whispers gained strength, carried from porch to porch until it felt as though the whole valley leaned in to watch the rancher's decision. One night at the saloon, the talk grew loud enough for fists to fly. A pair of cattlemen argued over which sister belonged at the ranch. One said the younger had been sent and must be honored, no matter her reluctance. The other claimed a household could not survive on fear, and the elder was the only one strong enough to see it through. The fight left both bloodied and the rancher's name spoken in tones of mockery and pity. The rancher heard of it the next day and rode out to the far pastures. Staying until nightfall, His anger buried deep where no one could see it. At the ranch, the sisters faced their own battles. The elder tried to draw the younger out, urging her to walk the pastures, to learn the rhythm of the land. But the younger shook her head, her eyes darting toward the horizon as though escape were her only wish. "This isn't my place," she whispered once, so softly it almost vanished in the wind. "It never was." The elder pressed her gently. "Then why step off the wagon?" Tears filled the younger's eyes. "Because I didn't know how to stay behind. They said it was best. They said it would secure our future. I didn't know. It meant giving myself away." The elder touched her hand, steady and firm. "Then let me carry it." "You don't have to." But that decision was not only hers to make, and both of them knew it. The rancher began to notice something else as the weeks turned. The men working his land showed more willingness to listen when the elder gave her observations. She spoke with a plainness that earned respect. If a fence leaned, she pointed it out. If a calf strayed too far, she saw it first. Slowly, the men began to look to her as though she had some claim, unspoken but understood. The rancher did not discourage it, though he knew the weight it carried. As harvest neared, the town prepared for a gathering, the kind of event that drew families from miles around. Food, music, and the steady hum of community. It was also the place where questions were asked most boldly, where gossip found its loudest voice. The sisters knew they would be seen together, and that every glance, every word, would be measured. The younger dreaded it, her stomach turning at the thought of stepping into that hall. The elder, though, seemed almost eager, her shoulders squared as though facing judgment with open eyes. When the night arrived, the rancher drove them into town, the wagon rattling over ruts and stones. The hall was lit with lanterns, laughter spilling out into the street. But the moment the trio stepped inside, the chatter shifted. Heads turned, eyes sharpened, whispers rose like a swarm of bees. The sisters stood side by side, one trembling, the other unyielding, as the community weighed them silently. The preacher approached first, his face kind but lined with concern. "It is not good to leave such matters unsettled," he said gently, his eyes moving between the sisters. "The valley thrives on order, not confusion." The rancher gave no answer. Instead, his gaze rested on the elder, then the younger. His silence saying more than words could. That night did not bring resolution. If anything, it sharpened the edges of the conflict, leaving the town more divided than before. Some said the rancher had been deceived, others that he was being given a chance at something unexpected. But all agreed that the matter could not rest much longer. Back at the ranch, the tension simmered. The younger grew more desperate, the elder more determined, and the rancher more torn. Each day deepened the lines of the choice before him, yet none of them spoke it aloud. And still, beneath all the whispers and the glances, a deeper mystery lingered. The true reason the elder had stepped forward, the secret that bound her actions to something larger than anyone yet understood. That truth waited like a shadow at the edge of the valley, threatening to change everything when it finally came to light. The nights grew colder, and the first frost laced the edges of the fields. The cattle gathered closer to the barn, there, breaths white in the moonlight, while the men worked longer hours to prepare for winter. Inside the ranch house, the fire burned steady, but it did not warm the tension that lived in every corner of the rooms. Each meal was quiet, each word measured, as though any sound louder than a whisper might break the fragile balance that held them together. The younger sister barely left the house anymore. She drifted from chair to window, her hands always busy with stitching, though the fabric often slipped as her thoughts wandered. The letters she had hidden in her trunk grew in number, unsent messages that no one would ever read. She wrote them like confessions, spilling out her fear, her longing to be free of the choice that had been pressed on her. But she never showed them to anyone, not even her sister. The elder, meanwhile, threw herself deeper into the life of the ranch. She rose with the men before dawn, learning the rhythm of their labor, riding out with them when the rancher allowed it. She was not careless, she carried herself with purpose, proving with each day that she could endure the harshness of the land. The men began to speak of her with quiet respect, though not without unease. It was clear to them that she was stepping into a place that had never been meant for her, and some wondered what it would cost them all when the truth came to a head. The rancher carried the weight of it silently. Each day he felt the eyes of the valley on him, the judgment of neighbors who measured his choices against their own sense of order. Some offered advice with pointed words: keep the promise, honor the letter, take the younger, and put an end to the whispers. Others hinted that a man must follow strength where he finds it, even if it breaks with tradition. Every word fed the fire of his indecision, and every glance reminded him that time was running short. One evening, as he returned from a long ride through the north pastures, he found the elder sister waiting near the corral. The sunset painted the sky red, the air sharp with the smell of cold earth. She stood with her arms folded, her eyes steady on him. "The town won't let you wait much longer," she said. "I know," he replied, brushing dust from his gloves. "They think it's a matter of pride, a man's word." "And is it not?" she asked, her voice firm. He studied her face in the fading light. "I gave my word to her," he said, tilting his head toward the house. "But she doesn't want it. And you—" He stopped, his throat tightening. "And I?" She pressed. "You act as though you were meant to be here all along." Her expression softened, but she didn't look away. "Perhaps I was. Perhaps that's why I stepped off the wagon first." The words struck him hard. For weeks he had wondered if chance alone had brought her forward, but now he heard the truth in her voice choice, not accident. Yet before he could answer, the younger appeared at the porch, her figure small against the lamplight. She had heard enough to know that the space between them was closing, and her heart twisted with a fear she could no longer hide. That night she wept into her pillow, her sobs muffled by the blankets. The elder lay awake across the room, hearing every sound, torn between comfort and resolve. She had carried her sister across the miles, stepped into her place to shield her from a fate she could not bear, but now the cost of that choice pressed heavy. If the rancher turned his eyes toward her, it would mean more than just gossip or whispers. It would mean that the younger had been erased, her future taken without a word. The valley itself seemed to lean toward the breaking point. At the next Sunday gathering, the preacher spoke of vows and truth, his sermon sharp with unspoken reference. Townsfolk glanced at the rancher and the sisters, their faces masks of polite curiosity, but their whispers running deep. Children stared openly, women tugged at their sleeves, and men shook their heads as if already passing judgment. That evening, as the rancher left the church with the sisters at his side, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was a traveler from back east, a cousin of the merchant who had once courted the younger. His voice was loud, his tone mocking. "Strange, isn't it? A man orders a bride and gets two. Can't even decide which one to keep." The words hung in the air, bitter as smoke. The rancher's jaw tightened, his hand flexing as though to strike, but he held himself still. The elder's eyes flashed with fire, but she too said nothing. The younger turned pale, clutching her shawl as though to disappear. The silence that followed was heavier than any blow, and the crowd carried it with them long after the family walked away. That night the rancher did not sleep. He paced the floor of his room, his thoughts running in circles. He had built his life on certainty, on fences that held, on cattle that multiplied, on weather that could be read in the clouds. But here was a storm no fence could hold back, no pattern could predict. Two sisters, one promise, and a valley waiting for him to choose. The tension in the house grew unbearable. The younger avoided her sister, speaking only in whispers, her eyes full of questions she dared not ask. The elder grew sharper, her words edged with the urgency of a woman who knew time was running out. And the rancher, caught between them, felt the weight of every glance, every silence, as though the walls themselves demanded an answer. One evening, as the wind howled across the valley and the lanterns flickered in the windows, the younger confronted her sister at last. "Why did you do it?" she demanded, her voice trembling but strong enough to carry. "Why did you step off the wagon before me?" The elder stood still, her hands clenched at her sides. "Because you weren't ready. Because they would have broken you." "You took my life," the younger cried, tears streaming down her face. "You made the choice for me." "I saved you," the elder said, her voice low but fierce, "and I would do it again." The rancher stood in the doorway, hearing every word. His heart pounded, the truth of their conflict striking him harder than any rumor or whisper. It was not simply about a promise or a bride. It was about sacrifice, about a bond between sisters that could not be measured by letters or vows. And yet, he knew, the valley would not care for such things. They would demand an answer, and soon. The days that followed carried a heavy stillness, as though the land itself was waiting. The cattle grew restless, the hands worked in silence, and the sisters moved around each other like ghosts. The rancher knew the moment was close. He could feel it in the weight of every glance, the press of every silence. When the town announced a harvest dance, the whispers rose to a fever pitch. Everyone knew the rancher would bring one of the sisters, and everyone knew that whichever one stood at his side would mark the unspoken decision. The hall would be lit with lanterns, the music bright, but beneath it all would be judgment. Sharp and waiting, the elder prepared without hesitation, her eyes clear, her step steady. The younger wept in secret, torn between relief and despair. The rancher saddled his horse that afternoon with hands that trembled, more than he would admit. As the sun sank behind the hills and the valley gathered in the hall, the rancher rode toward town with the sisters beside him, the wagon wheels rattling over the cold earth. Every sound felt louder, every shadow deeper, as though the very night was holding its breath. Inside the hall, the lanterns burned bright, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. Heads turned as the door opened, and the rancher stepped inside with the sisters at his side. A hush fell, heavy and sharp, the air thick with judgment and expectation. And in that breathless moment, as the music faltered and the whispers grew louder, the story reached its breaking point. The valley leaned in, the sisters stood still, and the rancher felt the weight of every choice pressing down on him. The climax was near, though no one yet knew how it would fall. Would you like me to carry the next section into the resolution and aftermath? Or pause here at the very height of suspense before everything breaks? The hall was silent as the rancher stood at the doorway with the two sisters beside him. Lantern light flickered against the walls, shadows dancing over faces turned in expectation. The music had stopped. The fiddler's bow held mitre, every note swallowed by the weight of the moment. The rancher knew there was no more time for waiting. The valley wanted its answer, and the sisters deserved it as much as the land itself did. He took a step forward, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. The elder stood straight, unflinching, her gaze steady as always. The younger trembled, her hands clutching the edges of her shawl, her eyes pleading though she said nothing. The rancher felt the pull of both, but he also felt the truth rise. Inside him, clearer than it had ever been. He stopped at the center of the room, the whispers rising like wind before a storm, and raised his voice so all could hear. "A promise was made," he said, his words slow and certain. "But a promise made without the heart cannot stand. What matters is not who is written on the page, but who has chosen to stand here, unshaken, in the face of it all." He turned toward the elder then, his voice carrying even though it softened. "And you have chosen." The crowd stirred, some gasping, others nodding. The preacher lowered his head as if to accept the decision, though a faint line of worry marked his brow. The younger let out a sob, not of anger but of release, as if a weight had finally been lifted from her chest. She turned away, tears spilling freely, yet in her eyes was the faint light of relief that at last she was free from the burden she had never wanted. The elder did not smile, but her shoulders eased as though she had been carrying a heavy yoke, and it had finally been set down. She stepped forward, not boastful but resolute, standing at the rancher's side as the hall watched in silence. The rancher felt her strength beside him, and for the first time since the wagon arrived, he knew the land and his life would not be undone by this choice. The music started again, hesitant at first, then stronger, as though the decision itself had given permission for joy to return. Some still whispered, some still frowned, but the valley understood that the matter was settled. They might not all approve, but they could no longer deny what was plain before them. The rancher had chosen, and the elder had stepped fully into the place she had claimed. The dance carried on, but for the rancher and the sisters, the night was not one of celebration. It was one of quiet endings. The younger lingered at the edge of the hall, speaking softly with a woman who had kind eyes and offered her a place to stay in town for a while. She looked back once at her sister and the rancher, and though her face was streaked with tears, there was no bitterness in her gaze, only the weary peace of someone finally allowed to lay down a burden she could not carry. When the rancher and the elder returned to the ranch, the valley seemed different beneath the stars. The air was sharp, the earth damp from recent rain, and the mountains stood tall as though bearing witness. The men at the bunkhouse tipped their hats, their nods respectful. They too had seen who had stepped forward when the time came. Life on the ranch slowly found its rhythm again. The elder moved into her new place beside the rancher, not as a guest but as someone who carried equal weight in the work and the decisions. She walked the pastures at dawn, worked beside the men, and helped the rancher plan for winter. Her strength was not in words alone but in action, and it showed each day in the way the land seemed to bend toward her steadiness. The younger, after some weeks, chose to leave the valley. With help from townsfolk, she boarded a wagon bound east, not back to the same place she had come from, but to a town where she could make her own start. She wrote one last letter before she left, this time not hidden but given to her sister. In it, she thanked her for the sacrifice, admitted her fear, and wished her happiness. The elder read it in silence, folded it neatly, and kept it tucked away in a drawer. The rumors in town never fully died, but they softened over time. Some spoke of scandal, others of strength, but all agreed that the rancher and the elder stood firm together. Their union was not the one written in letters or arranged by families, but it was one forged in choice, tested by whispers, and sealed by the weight of endurance. Through the winter, the ranch endured the harsh winds and deep snows. The elder proved herself more than capable, leading the men when storms struck, tending to the cattle with unflinching resolve. The rancher watched her often, not with surprise anymore, but with the quiet respect of a man who knew he had found a partner, not just a bride. When spring came, the valley bloomed with green, the rivers swelled, and life renewed itself. The rancher and the elder rode out together one morning, the sun rising behind the hills. They stopped at the highest point of the pasture, looking out across the land that stretched far and wide. The cattle moved like dark rivers against the grass, the fences stood strong, and the mountains loomed as steady as ever. "It feels different now," the rancher said, his voice low. "It is different," the elder replied, "because we chose it." He nodded, the truth of her words settling deep inside him. For all the struggle, the whispers, and the storms, they had reached this place together, not by chance but by will. The story of the wagon, the two sisters, and the rancher lingered in the valley for years to come. Some told it as a tale of scandal, others as a story of courage. Children grew up hearing of the woman who stepped off the wagon first, the man who waited too long to choose, and the sister who found her freedom in leaving. The story shifted with each telling, but at its heart remained the truth that choices made from strength endure, while those made from fear fade like smoke in the wind. For the rancher and the elder, life was never simple, but it was solid. Their union carried the mark of hardship, but also of resilience. Together they built a life that did not rely on promises made by others, but on the choices they made with their own hands and hearts. And for the younger, her journey eastward was not the end of her story, but the beginning of another. Though the valley did not follow her steps, those who remembered her spoke kindly, saying she had found the courage to leave behind what was never hers to bear. In the end, the story left the valley with more than gossip or scandal. It left a lesson written not on paper but on the land itself, that a promise without the heart is empty, but a choice made with strength can outlast storms, whispers, and time. The ranch stood, the cattle roamed, the seasons turned, and life carried on. The wagon that had once brought two sisters to the valley became only a memory, a moment that changed the course of many lives. And though the dust of that arrival settled long ago, the truth of it lingered still, the power of choice, the cost of sacrifice, and the strength of those who step forward when the moment demands it.